Okay, is it on? Well, good afternoon, everyone. It always seems so silly for me to be using a microphone when I'm like have a teacher voice and I should be walking back and forth. But we need to do this for the recording because we'll be recording this today and then it'll be on our website and the library's website for people to watch at a later time. So welcome to the second of the Waunakee Community Cares Coalition April Wellness Series. So this is always a popular one. Every year we host a wellness series topic around the hot topics in drugs, alcohol, mental health in our community. So a little bit before we start, Waunakee Community Cares Coalition is a coalition here in our community that serves the needs of our schools, community members around healthy, resilient behaviors. We do a lot of our work centers around prevention, alcohol and drug prevention, as well as mental health. And so you'll see us in all sorts of places. We work with our festivals in the summer to keep those safe for our youth. We work with our schools. Just last week, we had a keynote speaker from Philadelphia come in, and he worked with all of our high school students and our middle school students, and it was a really great event. Last week, Tom Farley was with us here at the library, so lots of really great programs. If you have a chance later, there's information over here on a side table that has how you can get involved with the coalition or other events happening. But a little bit about today, we have 4 speakers actually. So we have representation from first off, the Waunakee Police Department. We have Officer Tanner. He is our school resource officer at the high school. He's going to share kind of what they're seeing in our community as well as in our schools with drugs and alcohol. We also have Jessica Moehn, but I don't think it's Jessica Moehn anymore. Oh, okay, it's still, okay. She just got married. So she is one of our school psychologists in the school district, and she works primarily at the high school. And so she'll be sharing resources and things that we have for our youth in our schools if they are struggling with any of those those prevention things, drugs or alcohol, things like that in our schools. And then we have Myranda, who is here from Myranda, the organization again. So because you all couldn't hear that because I'm supposed to be saying this in the microphone, Myranda will say it again soon. But she is with public health and working with Dane County tobacco and going to share with us some of the trends that we're seeing in our county, in our state when it comes to that. So how we're going to organize today, we are going to start with Officer Tanner. He's going to share what they're seeing from a police department standpoint. Then Jessica's going to share what we're seeing from a school standpoint and some resources. And then Myranda will share at the end. That will go for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have questions at the end of the presentation. So then all of our panelists will come up here and we'll have a chance to ask them questions. So fantastic. Well, please give a warm welcome. We will start with Officer Tanner.
Beautiful. Well, hello. So today, we will talk about the police side of drugs and tobacco and alcohol in the community. I am Officer Weber. I am the school liaison for the 6 schools in Waunakee, 4,400 kids. Mainly work in the high school, but if the elementary schools need me, then I go to those schools, and it's part of counseling, part enforcement, more of a restorative idea and hoping kids go down the right path. So talking about drugs and tobacco, within the high school, we see more of the tobacco aspect, more primarily with vapes. They're the nicotine boxes or jewels were originally started out as. We're seeing more and more of those. It's not your traditional tobacco cigarettes, tobacco chew. It's more of the vapes and the availability to get them in all different flavors, all different varieties of strength and all of that. So As an officer, I see more of that in the schools. And the problem right now is it's getting younger and younger. I've seen children as old as 5th grade. I had one earlier this year in 5th grade that had one, and obviously that is not something you want to see. So it's very, very bad to see that, especially at a young age with the effects that we've seen in studies and more of that. So Detective Pitsley was supposed to be here with me, but he is not able to make it. He had an emergency that he had to attend to. So I'm going to read his notes and then I'm going to read my notes. So Detective Pitsley wanted to talk about alcohol compliance checks. So regularly we'll go into the bars in Waunakee and all the businesses and make sure they have valid licenses, they're not serving to minors, and they're following our code, our ordinances, state laws, X, Y, and Z there. To help ensure best practices for preventing underage drinking, he wanted to talk about like Waunafest, where we have protective fencing, so only certain people over the age of 21 are allowed to go. ID scanners regularly. If we think someone's under the age, we have scanners that can detect fake IDs. And security, we sometimes will use outside agencies to have security during Waunafest, or if it's a parade or something along those lines, just as another enforcement standpoint. Every tip we get about possible underage drinking, we follow through with. Every tip that we get has investigative aspects on it, so it's not like we're getting these tips and not doing anything about it. Detective Pitsley wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that whatever we get, we follow through with. We make sure that everybody's tip is followed through with. Some of the community events that the police department does, not school related, we do a citizens academy where people are allowed to come in and see how police operates. We do, I forgot how many weeks it is, but we do everything from OWIs, running through OWIs, to what's all in our squad, to what we do on a daily basis. We do ride-alongs, which I know most of the Citizens Academy will do ride-alongs after, and they have a really fun time with it. It's a good opportunity for them to see what we actually do here in Waunakee. The last big thing Detective Pitsley wanted to talk about was the place of last drink. So when we do our OWI investigations here in Waunakee, one of the big questions we ask when we ask following the arrest is, where did you have your last drink? Because that tells us, and it tells the Dane County, which we work with quite a bit, where are these people coming from? If they've had way too much to drink, that's a conversation we need to be having with those establishments. So more of the school side of everything. I first talked about vapes and how apparent they are in the school, and that's mostly what we're seeing, knock on wood. Haven't seen much alcohol related incidents within the past couple years, which is obviously a very nice thing. We talk about prom, graduation, a lot of key moments for kids' lives, which can be ruined by alcohol. So thankfully, we haven't seen many alcohol related incidents within the schools. Security, as a school resource officer, I have a lot of opportunities to provide security for prom, which was just this past weekend. Had a great time at prom, post-prom, just making sure that kids aren't coming in intoxicated. Also talking about the marijuana standpoint, how available it is, because we're surrounded by states that have legalized marijuana. A lot of kids are able to get the accessibility of it, but thankfully, knock on wood again, we haven't had that many problems within the schools regarding marijuana. And with that, it's more of the vape cartridges with THC than actual marijuana itself. There's not much actual like green leaf. It's more of this THC infused vapes because they have so many different flavors, and that's what attracts kids to wanting to use them. More security, talking about graduation. We do football games as well. In case somebody would want to bring something into the games, then obviously we're there to make sure that doesn't happen. Sometimes there's 1, 2, maybe even 3 officers, depending on how big the game is, if it's a rival, if there's possibility of fights happening, then we're there providing security. A lot of problems with the vape cartridges as well as the nicotine pouches. So not necessarily the more of like Zyn and Rogue. Zyn is like the little nicotine pouch that a lot of college age kids are using, which also comes into the high school as well. So that is obviously something we're looking for as well. A couple things that we do as police officers, we do a drug take back program, which are conjunctive with the school stuff as well. 1 day a year, people are allowed to come in, give us their unused pills that they don't necessarily need, and we dump them for them. That's free of charge. Just take it, and we take care of that in that regard. The last thing I wanted to touch on was mental health. I know Ms. Moehn is going to talk about that a little bit, but in our standpoint regarding the school, we usually consult with our social workers, school psychologists when we get a report of a mental health within the school, mental health issue. They do a very, very great job of that. And on the road, we work with Dane County Mental Health with working these cases and seeing if we can get them the resources they need. Ultimately in the school, I feel as mental health is one of the most predominant issues, I would say there, concerning that, as well as, I would say that's probably the biggest one regarding that. Vapes, alcohol, I would say mental health is probably the biggest issue we deal with right now. I don't know what that stems from, but at the end of the day, we're trying everything we can to make sure kids can go through school safely and move that into adulthood. So that's all I really have. So I guess we'll move on to Ms. Moehn.
Awesome. Thanks, Tanner. So I'm going to just talk briefly a little bit about some ATODA, alcohol, tobacco, other drug stuff in the high school, as well as mental health. So like Michelle said, my name is Jessica Moehn. I'm one of the high school social workers. Previously in the district, I was the district ATODA prevention coordinator. So I did some district-wide things and became very involved with the coalition. And I currently sit on the coalition board as a secretary. So I'm very involved still with the community. So it's kind of translated a little weird, but I'm going to talk a little bit about like some prevention pieces in schools. What are some protective factors that students have and like that we can build up as a school district, an intervention that might come up, and then we'll have questions after at the very end. So when I talk about prevention, we're talking about kind of the stuff that we do that might not look like mental health prevention or alcohol drug prevention, but is building up kids' coping skills, their resiliency, their like policies in schools that help support and create students who later go on to be resilient as they come across challenges in their development. So through that, we have each building has a student services team that we work with teachers, administration, and the students to help build up their mental health, their social emotional learning skills, and their kind of prevention, so that by the time they get to middle school, high school, adulthood, they're not seeking out alcohol or tobacco or other drugs to help cope with life stressors. So we also then have partnerships with a therapist agency in the community who's also works very closely with the coalition to help get kids access to mental health services, so that when they do come across challenges later, they're able to be connected to a therapist. We've seen a lot of mental health challenges, especially since COVID. Things really got really bad for students, being disconnected from their peers, being disconnected from their school. So we've seen a really strong need for some mental health support. We also have a program that we work with called Building Bridges that works with students in 4K through 9th grade that helps connect and essentially build that bridge with families and schools and other resources in the community. So when students are really struggling with their mental health and parents may not know how to access services or may not know what services are available. We work with building bridges to help get them connected in like a wraparound program so that they are able to be a student and be a kid and have happy things. And then obviously connected to the coalition as a district. So some protective factors. So protective factors, when I say that, I mean things that are in a student's life or things that are in the school that might help them just create a sense of self or exist so that they're not turning to things to cope that are what we see as like negative. So things like having trusted teachers at school or trusted adults, being involved in the school, being involved in clubs, having parents or family members engaged in the school community, feeling connected to their school, having clear expectations of their behavior. All of these things are, if students have little pieces of them or have some of these things, that can help build up their resilience and their coping so that when there's challenges, they have things to kind of fall back on. I included some data from a student survey that we did a few weeks ago. And one of the questions was asking students if they feel safe at school. And this is at the high school. So we had about over 75% of students saying, yes, they do feel safe at school. And then about 50 or so students said sometimes or never. So that's where us as student services really target those students who may say they don't feel safe at school. So overall, we're doing a really good job, but there's always going to be some students that may need some extra support. And then so as a kind of secondary prevention technique, if a student does get caught with drugs or alcohol or anything like that at school, that's where we also kind of step in. So most of our students will exist up on the top, and then some students kind of need that additional support. So one intervention that we do at the middle school and high school, if a student has been caught with drugs, alcohol, tobacco, anything like that, is we do an intervention called SBIRT, which I'll go over what that kind of stands for, but it's a evidence-based intervention to address some mental health or some substance use concerns. And we have staff who are trained in the middle school and in the high school to work with students on a kind of one-to-one basis when those code violations or if they get a ticket in the community, anything like that. So SBIRT stands for screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment. So what we do is we meet with students, we go over like a screening tool to kind of find where, okay, maybe they got caught drinking, but maybe there are some mental health issues going on that we need to address, and like they're drinking to cover up the mental health stuff. So that screening tool really gets at what's going on deeper. And then we work with them to develop a goal for like a brief goal to work on to try to reduce whatever that behavior is. So if it's vaping, we try to work with them on a goal of, I will not vape during the school day. And we kind of take it a little step at a time and work with them to eventually get to the point where they're maybe not using that coping strategy, but working with the student to develop some healthier coping strategies. And then at the end of the brief intervention, if there is still a need for some support, we can work with families and with the student to get them connected to like outside therapy or additional treatment for that. So that's kind of what we do as a less punitive response to tickets and things. And that is all that I have. So I will turn it over.
Good afternoon. How is everyone doing? Good. My name is Myranda Phelps Mcquire. I work for Public Health Madison and Dane County, and I also staff our Tobacco Prevention Control Funded Alliance, which is called the Dane County Alliance Against Commercial Tobacco. Today, we'll talk a little bit about some trends and new products that we're seeing, health effects of tobacco, mainly on young people, and some education and policy efforts. So starting off with trends in new products, nearly 1 in 4 Wisconsin high schoolers have tried an e-cigarette. The latest data that we have from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey shows about 10% of high schoolers are current users of e-cigarettes. That's down from about 14%, and that's a good sign. We're hearing from our partners at C-Tree and others that vaping may be kind of losing its cool a little bit among high school age. While that's great news, we're seeing an uptick in middle school vaping use. So that's up, unfortunately, from 4.5% in 2022 to around 6% now. So that's definitely something that we're keeping an eye on. About 66% of school age kids say it's relatively easy to get tobacco products. They're able to go into stores and buy these. They're getting them from older classmates, peers, older siblings, etc. Of the Wisconsin teens that have tried a tobacco product most recently, 53% are using e-cigarettes or vapes. So vaping is definitely the mode of choice, the most popular tobacco product among kids today. We're also seeing that flavors are a huge part of what attract kids to tobacco products. That is a huge change from 20 years ago when conventional cigarettes were kind of the norm. 92% of students surveyed would not try a non-flavored product. So that's a huge thing that we're seeing is most all tobacco products that kids are using currently have flavors. Something else that's really interesting is the difference between perception and reality when it comes to youth vaping. Most kids think that their peers are vaping. Kids report that over 50% of their peers are vaping, while we know that that number is closer to 10%. So that's something that is driven by social media, by shows on TV, etc. So that's something that we try to combat. A little bit about e-cigarettes. They were first developed almost 20 years ago, and they didn't catch on right away. And that's because conventional cigarette smokers didn't enjoy the experience. They produced a very rough, harsh hit. They didn't deliver as much nicotine as a regular cigarette, and they just kind of languished on the market for a while. That all changed with Juul. It's hard to believe, but that was almost 10 years ago now. Juul added benzoic acid to their nicotine, changing the nicotine to a salt-based nicotine, making it easier to inhale, stronger and more nicotine. At the same time, they developed this, great new strategy for inhaling more strong, potent nicotine. They also had a huge social media and media campaign targeting kids. So they sponsored music festivals, they sponsored film festivals, they paid social media influencers, all sorts of stuff to really attract kids. And I'm sure everyone has heard, but Juul has been sued, and that is starting to kind of reverse the Juul effect. But what happens is that newer companies kind of filled that market share. So we went from Juul to something called a puff bar. What puff bar did is instead of using nicotine from tobacco, they used synthetic nicotine. So they made a loophole around the FDA's ruling. Then came Elf Bar. Now that was already about 2 years ago. And the FDA started kind of cracking down on Elf Bar. And then others just continue to fill the void. So, 5 years ago to 2 years ago, these types of devices were the most popular ones. They're about $5, and they actually contain a full pack of cigarettes worth of tobacco in one of these devices. Now, the problem with these is the batteries weren't great, and they started to become harder and harder to get as the FDA started to crack down. So, getting a little ahead of myself here. These are just some slides to show 1 pack of cigarettes equals one of those smaller devices. The most popular e-cigs on the market today look something like this. They have a rechargeable battery that you can plug into any USB cord and, you know, your computer or car or anything. And they contain 5,000 puffs, which is up to 25 packs of cigarettes. So what we're finding is when kids get a hold of one of these, that's a heck of a lot of nicotine that they have at their disposal. They're also very, very easy to conceal. Where conventional or regular cigarettes, you know, they have a smell, they have a stigma. These are really easy just to pop into the bathroom and take a couple hits. We're also finding that kids are using these continuously through the day rather than, you know, going out for a cigarette break. The market has also done a really good job at blending flavors. So it used to be you had a banana vape or a mint vape. Now it's a banana ice mint. And what that's doing is creating these really complex flavor profiles and almost kind of like a collection mentality where kids like want the new flavor or the new best thing. The amount of nicotine is also something that we've seen increasing. You know, 5% used to be kind of the highest you could get, like that the human lung could tolerate, but now we're seeing 7-8% devices becoming more and more of the norm. And they also have drastically different looks. So once you kind of figure out what you think a vape is going to look like, very soon it will change into something that looks very different. What we're seeing a lot is kids are developing severe nicotine addictions and they're not able to vape everywhere, in school, around their parents, around trusted adults. So there's all these new products on the market called oral nicotine products, or I call them OMPs, and they've really started to fill the void. I see these around a lot. I have a 22-year-old niece, and I see these around social events that I see her at. These are little pouches that you can put in between your gum and your mouth. So it's kind of like the old school chew in a new form. But instead of just like rural kids who work on the farm doing chew, now we're seeing these in urban areas. I mean, it's just kind of everywhere. We also see gums, lozenges, even toothpicks. So it's really hard to know at first glance if the product that your kid or your loved one is using is a nicotine product or not. As far as health effects go, we're talking about young people. I think the most worrisome thing is brain development. We know that kids' brains develop until the age of 25, and we also know that nicotine really impairs the way that the brain develops and forms. We also know kids aren't the best at impulse control, so it's kind of a perfect storm. We know that kids who vape are more likely to have depression, anxiety, symptoms of ADHD, feeling othered or lonely, and all the things that they're looking for the vape to help with, like stress control and management, are actually making their stress worse in the long run. You know, lungs are also an issue. We see and hear a lot about chronic bronchitis and even sometimes lung scarring, and the heart too. It takes a while for this stuff to catch up, but you start to see the heart, you know, harden and things like that. And we know that tobacco use in childhood does make it more likely that you'll have heart problems when you get older. So the adolescent brain is primed for dependence and addiction. It's at the perfect time to develop these sometimes lifelong habits. Tobacco use in adolescence permanently lowers impulse control, which is a huge problem. This is a scary list of all the things that tobacco use during adolescence is correlated with. Even like diminished cognitive function, reduced attention span, increased stress levels, worsening anxiety symptoms and feelings of depression, which is such a bummer because we know that kids sometimes use vapes to cope with mental health problems when in fact that they're making them worse. our youth prevention team came up with this flyer for their school newspaper at East High. You see on one side, it lists all the things that are in vapes, and the other side, what potential negative health outcomes can be. There's a big mismessage that vapes only contain harmless water vapor, when instead they contain a lot of cancer-causing ingredients like acetone, formaldehyde, benzene, and cadmium. When you talk to kids today and you say, you know, what are you seeing as far as vaping? Sometimes you'll hear vaping what? Or people lump nicotine vaping and cannabis vaping together. That's because, as we know, marijuana, Delta 9, is illegal in Wisconsin, but hemp products are not. And that is due to a loophole in the Farm Bill that was passed in 2018. And we're seeing in the last 5 years, a lot of stores popping up that I consider smoke shops, where they have nicotine devices and they also have hemp devices. The hemp in the cannabis plant usually contains very low levels of anything that can get you high, but you can take that into a lab and turn it into something that is very similar to the marijuana that is illegal in Wisconsin and that most certainly does get you high. So we're seeing a lot of vape shops that have nicotine vapes and cannabis vapes. And like I said, a lot of the kids today kind of lump these two together. We're also seeing a lot of cannabis products that mimic food. These are also really hard for adults to spot. They're made to look like food. They're not regulated by the FDA or anyone at this time. They're easy to conceal. They take a lot longer to kick in than smoking or vaping the product. So what can happen is somebody can consume, you know, a couple gummies, not feel anything, and then take some more. And that leads to like overuse, feelings of paranoia, anxiety. In Madison, we receive about a call a day to our paramedics due to the fact that somebody can consume too much cannabis and they're feeling like they're being sick. 1 in 3 teens have used cannabis by 12th grade, but 6% of high school seniors use cannabis daily. And teens who use e-cigarettes are 3 times more likely to use cannabis products. So that is there is definitely a correlation there, and more as these products are readily available throughout our communities, there's a normalizing effect where kids don't necessarily differentiate between a tobacco vape and a cannabis vape. These gummies were purchased at a shop in Madison. They contain about 10 milligrams worth of THC per gummy. So if you took one, you might feel mildly euphoric, or, you know, depending on your own body's composition, you might feel a little something. These gummies in this package contain 1,000 milligrams of THC type product. So one of these is equal to 100 of these. So that's what I'm talking about with like the lack of regulation, packaging, oversight. It's really easy for kids to get a product and take it without exactly knowing what they're getting into. Same thing for like this energy drink looking thing, 100 milligrams of THC type product, so equal to 10 or so gummies. So just a ton of product. And that's, I think, why we get kids, you know, call 911. As far as education and policy, what can we do? So Wisconsin is one of only 8 states that doesn't have a tobacco 21 law on the books. Every other state has changed the age to buy tobacco products from 18 to 21, other than Wisconsin and 7 other states. So we're definitely out of step. And what this does is it creates a lot of enforcement issues. So when we go out in our teams to do tobacco compliance checks, we can only use 16 and 17-year-old kids, which are like 5 years younger than the federal legal limit to purchase. So it creates confusion with retailers. We've heard retailers say, that's not the law we follow, when I tell them that the federal law is the law of the land. And it creates problems with enforcement since we only can use such young kids to do our compliance checks. Wisconsin Wins is our tobacco compliance check program. We get out as much as we can in the community. Last year, we did about 450 tobacco compliance checks with about a 10% fail rate. So about 50 businesses sold illegally to our underage inspectors. And these are 16-year-old, usually high school juniors. We did 8 inspections in Waunakee. We usually try to get to Waunakee twice a year. Last year, we just did 1 survey, but 2 businesses sold. So that's a really small sample size, but it's, unfortunately, we did have those 2 sales. FACT is our youth-led tobacco prevention movement. We try to get kids involved as much as possible to set good social norms in their communities and kind of lead the way as far as creating change. We also talk a lot about tobacco-free beaches and parks. It goes a long way to shift culture when you go to public places and there isn't tobacco smoking. And we really want to include e-cigarettes in all of that as well. And including e-cigarettes in municipal smoke-free air policies is also a really good idea. Waunakee has already done this, but it's weird to think, only 15 years ago, it was normal to see smoking in restaurants and bars and places like that, where that is completely out of the norm now. We do keep an eye on things like cigar bars. That's another recent thing that we're seeing an uptick in. And, the more places where smoking and vaping is socially acceptable, that kind of erodes and works against our smoke-free air policies. I'll kind of rip through these, but this is a timeline of the recent FDA crackdowns. We talked about the fact that Juul came under fire in 2020 by the FDA. They had to pull all of their flavored products off the market. But as we see, there's copycats that quickly filled that void. In 2022, the FDA finally said that they have authority to regulate any tobacco product. And in 2023, the FDA said, no more Elf Bar, no more this, no more that. But you can go into smoke shops right here in Waunakee and see all these products readily for sale. And this is just another reminder of that. The FDA makes rules, but then the industry quickly finds workarounds and loopholes. As you see, this isn't a picture of an Elf Bar, but it looks exactly like one. The menthol ban has been something that has been talked about recently in the news. The FDA has said that they would like to ban menthol. That decision is sitting with the president waiting for signature. Menthol has been marketed towards African-American people and people of color. And the CDC says that banning menthol will save 654,000 lives when it's done. So we're also seeing that of young people who still do smoke cigarettes, they're mostly smoking menthol cigarettes or little cigars that are flavored with menthol. And these can be purchased for about $2. Here are some slides about how to talk to your kids. We have a QR code that goes in more depth to this. It's really important to know the facts, to put yourself in your kids' shoes, to take a calm and open approach and to find the right place in time. Also to take time to practice. I always like to try to acknowledge my kids' independence, although that can be difficult at times. Ask for their perspective first. Ask what, just get in the habit of routinely asking what's going on with them, their peer group, and at their school. Also be ready to hear that your kids have vaped. And sometimes when kids are vaping, there is a physical addiction to nicotine that might not be solved overnight. So it's a good idea to be receptive to that, and to also know that if you are lucky enough to have a family doctor, that a lot of times kids do need the support of a medical professional. Blame big tobacco, not your kid, and avoid scare tactics. And connect with what they care about. I know a lot of kids today are really heavily invested in mental health. So you can talk more about how vaping is bad for mental health. A lot of kids are into sports, so the effects on the lungs and the heart might be a better approach. And a lot of kids are really into the environment. And vapes contain toxic ingredients, so toxic that we have a really hard time finding waste management partners who will even take discarded vapes. So it usually happens as they get thrown into the landfill, and they're full of heavy metals, and they can cause fire. Always say thank you to your kids, help them manage their stress, help them manage peer pressure, follow up, stay up to date, and share information. And there's a QR code here if you're interested in finding out more as to how to talk to your kids about vaping. The Wisconsin Quit Line is a great resource. The Quit Line recently added a new text to quit service. So instead of calling on the phone, which we know that young people just don't do, they can actually text a number and get a counselor to kind of walk them through first steps. This is for 13 to 17-year-olds. Once you're 17, you can actually get like some cessation tools like gums, lozenges, and things like that. And this is just my information again. I think that is all. Thank you so much for listening.
All right, we are going to have our panelists come up here to the front and take a seat, and then we are going to open it up for questions. So very informative. I learn something new every time I hear any of them speak. It's great information, right? Information that raises our eyebrows a bit. And it's like, wow, what's going on right now? But are there any questions that folks have for our panelists? Okay, I'm going to bring the microphone to you. So I know, right?
Hi. We have a lovely new smoke shop just opened in Waunakee here. Very Vegas looking, bright lights, flashing, lovely. I just was very discouraged by that. We already had two, I think, and now we have a third. So are the same age controls placed on these, the gummies and I know they sell, we had a store here that closed, but they sold the Delta 8 products. So do you have to be 18 or 21 to go into those smoke shops and make purchases?
What I know in it, yeah. So currently there is no age restriction for any Delta 8 or hemp derivative products. It is solely up to the business owner to enforce that. But like we can go out and do checks to make sure that people aren't selling, menthol cigarettes to young people. There's nothing that we can and write a ticket through the health department, there is no enforcement that we can do, and there's no current state statute that prevents young people from purchasing that. No age restriction at all.
I will say, just to follow up to what Miranda said, so one of the things the coalition does is we go and meet with the vape shop owners and talk to them about just the importance of not selling to our youth, because it's such, a big concern. So I know one of the 3 vape shops, the one that's closest to M&M over that way, that they've been really receptive to us. They talk about that they have 2 forms of identification. They don't sell to anyone. They actually look at a student or somebody's ID and then runs the ID to make sure that they're over 18. So whether or not that's really enforced or they're just trying to tell me what I want to hear, maybe, but I think we all have to work together, right? And so we have those conversations, but like Miranda says, ultimately they can sell to anyone. Another question.
So I'm not sure how long ago, but I was at a talk where there was a discussion about gangs in Waunakee, and then the drug parties where they would bring all the meds and mix them together and have the drug parties. Are we in fentanyl? I guess those kind of more serious things, are they happening here?
So regarding the gangs and parties of the mixing of drugs, I haven't heard that in my regard in the past few years. If we do hear something that would be coming into Waunakee, if that would be from Madison, if that'd be from a different state, then we usually work pretty collaboratively with them. If it's enforcement for them coming up to us coming down to them, we work pretty closely with them if we feel as something might be in our jurisdiction. But regarding the gangs and drugs, I haven't heard of anything in my regard. I know Detective Pitsley would probably agree with me on that. And fentanyl, as you mentioned, is also a huge issue, not only in Waunakee, but also in the surrounding area. Thankfully, within the past couple of years, we haven't had too many issues with fentanyl, but I know Madison and the bigger cities have had issues with a lot of things being cut, as in using certain substances to make pills with a little gram of fentanyl to sell quite a bit. So we're always looking out for that. And I know we have the testing capabilities through the health department and the hygiene lab down in Madison to test for fentanyl and fentanyl related drugs, because everything can be cut with fentanyl, which is a scary thing to think about, especially when we're doing traffic stops, we're getting drugs, and the possibility of us, even officers, ingesting these drugs, if it's through nasal, eyes, whatever, we're doing everything we can to make sure that that doesn't happen. If we have Narcan on standby, X, Y, and Z. So good question.
Anyone else want to? I do know at the height, all of our schools now have Narcan boxes in them. So anyone has, any students or anyone in the schools have access to that. The library has one as well. So if you think that you might be in situations, and we always encourage our kids to, if they think they might be in a situation, just to grab one of, Narcan. There's also pamphlets to tell you how to administer it as well, that you have that just in case. All right, other questions? Ryan, you've got to have a question.
On your in school, on the SBIRT efforts you're doing, how many students do you usually see are coming through and using SBIRT, and what are some of the end results? Are you seeing some positive interactions and results from that?
I don't know numbers off the top of my head, but I've also, now that I'm kind of based at the high school, we have people trained at the middle school and additional student services at the high school who are trained, so that it's a more personal connection with students. So that's been really great. And I have seen a lot of great success with it because we're able to make that kind of personal connection, and it's very student led. It's not me like telling them tobacco is bad for you, alcohol is bad for you. It's very like if they have the motivation and like the desire, even if it's just like a tiny little bit, I can use that motivation to help them take little steps towards creating like a better habit. And we're able to get more to like that mental health piece so that we can work with students to find other coping strategies. And it's kind of processing, like if it's peer pressure, if they're like at a party, like, okay, maybe you still want to go to the party, but maybe not partaking in the drinking, like just kind of taking some steps, and like you don't need to be under the influence to be having fun. And so I have seen a lot of students have some like aha moments where it's like this was making me not feel good because I wanted to fit in, and now I can still have fun with my friends but not be using substances. So it's been great.
Fantastic. Any other questions? Oh, I gotta give you this so they can hear.
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say, I do work at Walgreens just on Sunday mornings, and I don't have any trouble with, anybody wanting to buy anything they shouldn't. And I have the older gentlemen, like say, not old, but old enough, 30, 40, 50 years old, that come in and buy Zyn and cigarettes. So they're still smoking at that age, but I never have any young kids come in and try, or even anybody that's 21 that I can tell they're buying for somebody else. So I think they're pretty careful. So that's kind of good.
It's great. And I will say that we rarely have any sales at a Walgreens. I mean, I can maybe one or two in the last several years that I've been doing this. And I feel like Walgreens and a lot of times Quick Trip and the bigger corporations, they put more on the front end into staff training and make sure that people do know how to check IDs. Yeah. Yeah. And like the Zyn and other products, I mean, they can be helpful for people that are trying to decrease, cigarette smoking use. I feel like, what we don't want to see is young people starting tobacco products. But I know Walgreens also has removed all their flavored vapes. They don't sell as many of the youth appealing products. So that's great. I love Walgreens.
I will say, real quickly, and then we'll do one more question. But one of the things that the coalition has done as well is we've delivered lock boxes to the vape shops. And so we've asked them, because there are products that especially a young person, if they ingest it, like Myranda said, like has so much THC or Delta 8 in it that could really cause harm, that they give they say they're giving out these the lock boxes to some of their patrons who might have something at home and young ones at home, so they can lock it up so that their child doesn't think, oh, it's gummy bears, I'm going to go grab myself a couple. So that's been a great strategy. And the vape shops have been really receptive to that, to say, yeah, we'll take some of those and encourage that. So one more question, or who had, yes, question, sorry.
So I am raising my granddaughter. She's 12 years old. I'm going to try not to get emotional. Her mother was a heroin addict, and she passed away last year. So I'm very interested in prevention. She's also on the spectrum, and in my opinion, more vulnerable than most kiddos. She's always worried about fitting in with her peers. Do you do anything at the school special, like targeting the neurodiverse population? Maybe because, in my opinion, they're more vulnerable than the regular population. She will do anything if her peers tell her it's cool or it's fun. And I could see, and I mean, she's 12 now. She'll be 13 next month. But there's no doubt in my mind that if someone handed her a gummy, that she would take it. And I went into the smoke shop and you can buy those Delta 8 gummies up to 1,200 milligrams. She weighs 90 pounds. That would do a lot of damage. And so my question is there any program that the schools are offering for that particular population that is more targeted, I guess?
Thank you so much for sharing, and I'm so sorry to hear that. But off the top of my head, I can't necessarily think of something that would be targeted. I don't know that I don't know what curriculum like could exist or what that could look like. I think it would be a very case by case thing, and maybe something to talk with her like case manager at school if she has one, or school counselor about, just to kind of sometimes through other lessons or through just like making positive choices and other kind of lessons that aren't necessarily like drug specific, it can help build those skills of like how to handle situations of peer pressure and how to make those positive choices in ways that kids might not even realize is a skill that they'll use later down the road. So I'm sure that those lessons or those conversations are being had. It just might not be directly like connected to drugs and alcohol, but I think it would be a good question or something to just bring up. Teachers are very creative and can think and can kind of weave that into lessons and help her build those skills so that down the road, if that situation happens, she knows how to say no or how to exist in that situation.
Sure.
Yeah, I was gonna add to that. So for the SRO position, for the 10th graders, we do presentations for the health students. We do one on drugs and tobacco and like the addictives of it and everything like that. The preventative aspect of that as well. So that's a good opportunity, obviously, once it gets to that age, because that's when we think they start to experiment with some of these different things. Obviously, we're seeing it younger and younger now, so maybe that's an initiative on our part as well, getting into the middle school and intermediate school and doing presentations on that as well. I know the kids get a lot out of it. I've talked to a couple after the presentations and they've said that they've learned a lot more than what they already did. So on that regard, we're doing that, but it's a good opportunity for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you say a follow-up question here?
Sorry. So I know that there is a program that runs, I think it's typically 3 consecutive Saturdays for younger kids, teens, where they come to the police department and they, is there any discussion about drugs and alcohol during that program? I've wanted to get her involved in that just because I want her to develop a healthy relationship or healthy attitude when it comes to police officers and figures of authority. But the Saturdays have just never worked out because she has other extracurricular activities. But is there any aspect of that that talks about drugs and alcohol?
I don't think so. Because I know we do radar enforcement, we do like fingerprinting, and we do the OWI stuff. So maybe in the future we could, during the OWI investigations, talk about drugs and alcohol and just say, hey, this is what we're seeing. Be careful of it. It's more of an educational experience for the children to see, first off, what emergency services does, then police, and then the fire department. And then it's a good opportunity because the kids get to see at the end all 3 agencies work together in a case if it's an accident, just to see the collaborative effort there. So.
Any other questions? Yeah, well, I just want to, first of all, thank our presenters. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insight and knowledge with the group. And thanks for those that shared today. Thanks for your questions. And, you know, we all are working together to make sure our communities are healthy and resilient and that we have only good stories to tell, right? In support of our kiddos. So I appreciate you being here. If you go, eventually you'll get, this recording will be on our website, the library's website. There's all sorts of other information. We have one more next week, April Wellness Series, which is around mental health and suicide prevention. So we have some of our collaborative partners from the Psychotherapy Center of Waunakee that will be presenting here. They might also have some really great resources around drugs and alcohol prevention as well and how it relates to mental health. So thank you again and have a good afternoon.